Up until now, we've been learning the modes as 7 different hand positions that lock together to play the major scale all throughout the neck of the guitar over chords, right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about modal playing and how you can make these sound different. So you may have noticed that we've done 7 different shapes, and they're all slightly different from each other, and they sound a little bit different from each other, but we haven't really gotten them to sound so different from each other. And the reason is because we've all been doing it in the same key. So for example, right, we've done it in the key of C. So here's a C major chord. And that's kind of a happy, uplifting chord in and of itself. And one of the last ones we did was the Locrian scale, which we said was a very dark scale, right? And that started on B. So B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, right? So here's the C major chord, and here's the 7th mode, B's mode in C. And if we combine them, it doesn't really sound that dark, because really we're just playing the same notes of the C major scale, albeit we are starting at a B, so it sounds a little bit different, but we're not really getting the feel for what Locrian sounds like. So we're going to talk about different ways to bring out the individual sound of each mode. But before we do that, I want to just take a note and talk about how the guitar community looks at modes. And it seems like there's a lot of pressure to play modes the correct way. Because right now, all we've done is use the modes as hand shapes to play the major scale and make things sound right or sound correct. Now, I don't really think there's a wrong way to play the modes, even though this isn't really modal playing. We're just still making things sound together because we're playing in one key all throughout the guitar, and that's a really good way to stoke your creativity. But if you want to take it the next level and kind of see what each of them offer, this is a good way to do it. And at the end of the day, you're not really going to dazzle anyone with your mastery of the modes. It's either you're going to sound cool or you're not, right? So I just kind of want to go over a few different chords and show how they can be used within a progression with the different modes. So let's start out with just a C chord, right? Now, a C chord in and of itself doesn't have a key that we can discern yet. Now, it gives us a good idea of what it might be. It could be the 1 chord in the key of C. It could be the 4 chord in the key of G. And it could be the 5 chord in the key of F. So it would make sense that the modes we would use to play over that chord would be the 1st, 4th, and 5th modes, which would be Ionian or major, Lydian, or mixed Lydian. So if you just have a C chord, that's all you have. Maybe you're playing with somebody else, or you're just kind of extending a chord on your own. That's a good way to kind of think of it as the chord is your bass, and then you can jump off using whichever mode you kind of perceive. So a lot of times modal playing is playing with the changes, right? So if there's a chord progression, maybe just like a C major to an A minor, and that's it, right? We still aren't totally sure which key we're in just by giving those 2 chords, right? Again, we have a good idea. We could be in the key of C playing a 1-6 progression, in which case the modes we would play over the C major chord would be the C major scale, and over the A minor chord would be the A minor scale. But that's going to kind of give you the same sound, albeit with a couple little differences. Now, where you can use your knowledge of the differences between the modes is an extension of that chord. So how do we create like a Locrian feel over a C major chord? You might think that, yeah, just go to where the Locrian scale exists in the key of C, which is that B, and then start playing those notes. But again, that's not really going to give you the sound of Locrian. The way I like to think of it is if you want a Locrian feel in the key of C, play C Locrian, right? So instead of going a C chord to, we're going to move that from a B to a C. And to me, that's more of an accurate example of that sound, the 7th mode sound. Even though really musically it doesn't fit. Because a C major chord has a major third, right? A C, an E, and a G. And the C Locrian scale has has a minor third, right? So there's dissonance there, but that dissonance is actually what's kind of responsible for that. So I'm gonna link to a backing track, and one of the chords in the backing track is gonna be a C major chord. And feel free to play any of the modes over that C major chord. And sometimes it technically won't fit, and that's fine. This is just kind of like an exploration of the modes. So if you want a Dorian feel in the key of C, instead of going to D Dorian, try throwing C Dorian in there. And that's what practice is all about, is just finding the things that you find acceptable, because if you're just playing what's right, everything is going to sound more or less a little bit the same. Everything's going to sound very safe. If you want to start taking more risks, and that's a great thing that the modes can help with, is just kind of like going outside of the box and exploring things. Start playing different modes off of the same note. And the reason that this is creating such a different atmosphere is because we're changing the tonal center. Now what I mean by that is, again, in that key of C, or whatever key you're in, when there's just a C major chord, we're not even thinking of it as the one chord in the key of C. We're just thinking of it as a group of notes, C, E, and G, that are telling our brains, our ears, what the tonal center is, right? That's why a lot of the time, the first chord you hear in a song, that's the key it's in, right? If a chord starts with a C, there's a better than 50% chance that it's going to be in the key of C, just because that first strum of a chord is establishing that tonal center, and everything we do is kind of reacting off of that tonal center. So if you have a tonal center and then you start manipulating the modes around it, you start ending up with different interesting types of sounds, right? Now, the safest one you could do is just use the one that lines up with it, right? So like if I have a C major chord to a G major chord, and I'm thinking in the key of C, then I could just play the C major scale over the C major chord, and the G Mixolydian scale over the G major chord, right? Because that's where it fits, and that's going to sound great. But if you want to explore the modes a little bit more, try doing something differently, right? So maybe for the C major chord, we actually play C Aeolian or C minor, right? So over the C major chord, you could use all those kind of minor pentatonic licks, or anything you know in the C minor scale. And then for G, which again would be the G Mixolydian mode normally, maybe we could actually even go Locrian there, right? So for the C part, to G, now the one thing I want to stress is that if you're playing with other musicians, you kind of need to be on the same page, or else this kind of philosophy can go really, really off the tracks. Like if there's two guitarists, if you're one of two guitarists and there's a bass player, and the other guys are kind of playing a C to a G, and every time they play a C major, you just rip off some like C Locrian riff, and every time they play a G major, you're still in G Locrian. Like they're gonna kick you out of the band. Like it's unacceptable, because it's just gonna sound so bad. You kind of have to make sure you're all working together as a unit. And that's where music theory really comes in handy to communicate with other musicians. Like for example, again, with that C, right? As soon as you get a bass player to jump on board, he plays a B over a C major, you guys are actually combining to play a bigger chord. Now if it's on top, a C major plus a B is a C, E, G, B, which is a C major 7. So if you kind of doubled up with like a guitar player, and one guitar player plays a B, and the other one plays a C major chord, you both are combining to play a C major 7 chord. So that's why in a band you want to be on the same page musically and theory-wise, so maybe two guys in the band can hold down the fort while one of them kind of explores something modally, because if everybody is exploring different things at the same time, it's really going to be unlistenable. And again, nobody is ever going to really congratulate you on your mastering of the modes. It's just, does it sound cool or does it not? So again, don't get too stressed out over trying to play modally, but if you want to experiment, that's what backing tracks are for. Like you can see what the chord is, and then you can kind of interpret which mode you want to play over that. And don't always be handcuffed to playing in the key all the time, because a lot of times some of the best sounds are maybe just taking something way out of left field that isn't in the key, that isn't even close to being in the key, and working that into a melody.